I used to think Americans were demons. I taught my men, if you ever fall into their hands, die before you surrender. And now here I am, Lieutenant Kurt Weiss, 27 years old, once commanding a whole platoon in Normandy, hands tied, sitting in the back of a truck belonging to those very demons. The road to the prison camp was rough, dust rising like smoke. An American soldier sat in the front, chewing gum, not even glancing our way. I looked around. The men who once shouted, "Heil Hitler!" at my command now kept their heads down like drenched sheep. I felt humiliated. Humiliated by defeat, but even more by the fact that they had forgotten they were German soldiers. When the truck stopped, they herded us out and lined us up. I stood straight, eyes forward. One of the Americans gestured to untie my ropes, but I didn't move. "Leave it," I said in broken English. "I don't need mercy." He stared at me for a moment, then shrugged and cut the rope anyway. "Suit yourself, Lieutenant." I didn't thank him. A German officer never bows to the enemy. That night, in a damp wooden barrack packed with more than 100 men, the air stank of sweat, mud, and gunpowder. I ordered, "Keep discipline." We are still soldiers. No whining, no begging. No one answered. A moment later, I heard a dry laugh. A voice from the corner said, "Soldiers, sir." "We're prisoners now." I turned. It was Rolf, my sergeant for 2 years. I glared at him. "Say that again." "I'm just telling the truth. Honor doesn't fill my stomach." "You still think you can give orders?" I stepped forward, grabbed his collar. His eyes no longer showed fear, only exhaustion and contempt. We wrestled to the ground. Shouts erupted, boots thudded on the floor. An American guard rushed in, yelling, breaking up the fight. They pulled me to my feet, blood dripping from my lip, but I felt no pain, only emptiness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I listened to the rain on the tin roof, the heavy breathing around me. I looked at the men who used to call me Herr Lieutenant, now curled up in torn blankets, rank and title erased. One whispered, "I just want to survive and go home." Another murmured, "Yeah, even surviving isn't easy anymore." I turned my face to the wall. I hated them, hated that weakness. I told myself, I won't be like them, I won't bow, but deep down, I knew I had lost everything. My rank, my power, my faith. All that remained was a hollow sense of honor that no one cared about anymore. The next morning, the Americans brought dry bread. Rolf, the same man who'd fought me, quietly handed out rations. I avoided his eyes. When he gave his own portion to a younger prisoner, I caught a faint softness in his gaze, a look I'd never had. I didn't understand why it stung my heart. Maybe because I realized, in this camp, all ranks had vanished. All that was left was starving men trying to stay alive. And I, though I hated to admit it, was just one of them. 3 days later, I began to hate the silence. Not because I was afraid, but because silence let me hear my own stomach growl. In the camp, food was scarce. A slice of bread no bigger than a hand. A thin liquid they called soup. I wouldn't touch it. Not because I despised it, but because I wanted them to know I was different. I was an officer, not some beggar taking food from the enemy. But on the third afternoon, when I saw a fellow German soldier stoop to pick up a crumb of bread from the floor, it felt like someone squeezed my heart. I barked, "Don't pick that up! You disgrace the uniform." He looked up at me, smiling wearily. "Disgrace? I'm just hungry, Lieutenant. Can you eat your honor?" The whole barrack went dead quiet. I rose, ready to strike, but a few men held me back. One whispered, "Let it go. He's right." I turned to them, stunned. Just days ago, they still took orders from me, still greeted me with a salute. Now they looked at me like I was a madman clinging to a dead past. I clenched my fists until my palms bled, then released them. I knew if I fought again, the Americans would step in. I didn't want them to see me weak, so I stayed silent. That night I sat outside the barrack, staring at the barbed wire. Moonlight glinted on the steel like a knife's edge. I thought of my father, a World War I veteran, who once told me, "Losing a battle isn't what's terrifying. Losing your dignity is." I whispered to myself, "I haven't lost it yet, Father." But then I heard the sound of someone inside chewing bread, dry, slow, deliberate, and my throat burned. The next morning, when rations were handed out, a young soldier named Carl, sitting beside me, cut his piece of bread in half and offered me one. "Eat, Lieutenant. Otherwise you'll pass out." I stared at the bread in my hand, my chest burning. I couldn't take it. "Thank you, but I don't eat charity." He smiled softly. "It's not charity. It's sharing." I said nothing. I turned away, but hunger didn't. It clawed at my insides, pounded my head, made my vision swim. I hated it. Hated my body for betraying my will. I had always believed willpower was a man's greatest strength, but now willpower didn't make my stomach full. That afternoon, Rolf, the man who had fought me before, spoke up again. He mocked loudly from across the room, "Waiting for roasted meat and wine, Herr Lieutenant." "Those days are over." Laughter erupted, sharp, bitter. I didn't answer, but it felt like someone scraping my pride one cut at a time. I tightened my fists but didn't rise, not out of fear, but because I had no strength left. That night it poured rain. I lay on the floor, stomach empty, head spinning. Rolf snored nearby. Carl coughed until he choked. I suddenly hated the whole world. Hated the war, hated the enemy, hated even myself for believing I was stronger than the others. In the dark, I whispered, "If I ever make it home, I'll never teach anyone to hate again." No one heard me. Only the wind slipped through the cracks in the wood, cold and damp as the loneliness inside me. I lost track of how many days had passed. In this camp, there were no calendars, no clocks, only empty stomachs and sunken eyes like hollow stones. In the mornings, we rose with the first pale light. At night, we lay down before darkness had fully settled. Hunger slowed everything. Even thoughts became tired, as if trudging through mud. I had once believed I could endure it. An officer had to withstand hardship, but real hunger was something no one could resist. It didn't just claw at the stomach. It dulled the mind, blurred the edges of reality. I began to hear strange sounds, the crack of bread, the clink of a spoon against a bowl ringing like some ghostly trumpet. At noon, they gave us a bowl of watery soup. The liquid was as clear as dishwater, with a few tiny scraps of potato floating on top. I sat staring at it, unable to eat, not out of arrogance, but because my throat closed up. Carl, the young soldier, pushed his portion toward me. "Eat, Lieutenant. If you don't, you'll die." I snapped at him. "I don't need your pity." He sighed and stayed quiet. But when I turned away, I saw him quietly place the bowl in front of me before walking off. I sat looking at that bowl for a long time. Outside, the wind slid through the barbed wire with a whistling hiss. I remembered Hamburg. I remembered my mother's kitchen, where she would sprinkle salt into the soup and say, "Kurt, eat, my boy." Salt brings out the taste of life. I gave a bitter smile. The taste of life? Now the only taste I knew was the dry grit of dust on my lips. That afternoon, a soldier collapsed in the yard. The Americans ran to lift him, carrying him back inside. I watched, uneasy. They, the enemy, were saving one of us. I forced myself to believe they did it only to keep their prisoners alive, not out of kindness. But something inside me began to shift. Night came, cold and biting. I couldn't sleep. Somewhere in the dark, someone was crying. A man's muffled sobs, as if he feared even his own ears hearing him. "I want to go home." Just those 4 words made my heart clench. I wanted to go home too. I wanted to see my mother, to smell warm bread again, to hear birds singing through my bedroom window, but I couldn't say it aloud. I was afraid that if I spoke, whatever pride I had left would dissolve. By the 5th night, hunger made me dizzy. Every time I stood, my vision went black. I stumbled, shoulder hitting the wooden wall. Carl hurried to catch me. "You need to eat, Kurt, even just a spoonful." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see myself as an officer. I saw myself as a starving, weak, frightened man. My hands trembled as I picked up the spoon. The soup was cold, but I ate it as though it were the finest meal of my life. When I finished, I set the bowl down in silence. Carl smiled. He didn't say a word, just patted my shoulder lightly. That gesture made me want to cry. That night, I didn't dream of the battlefield anymore. I dreamed of my mother's hand on my head, her voice soft as ever. "Live, Kurt. Just live. Everything else comes later." I woke in tears. I had lost, not to the Americans, but to my own pride. Yet in that defeat, I felt a strange relief. For the first time since my capture, I no longer felt ashamed of surviving. I only felt grateful to still be alive, to still remember home. I can't remember what day it was. All I recall is the sky, gray and heavy like ash, and the wind blowing so hard that dust stung my eyes. My whole body trembled, not from cold, but from hunger and exhaustion. The hunger had dragged on for days. My stomach felt shriveled, stabbing with pain every time I bent forward. I sat leaning against the barrack wall, trying to breathe evenly. Everything around me moved in slow motion. The sound of coughing, the shuffle of boots, the squeal of the iron gate, all merging into one weary symphony. Carl sat next to me, holding a bowl of hot soup he'd just received. He offered it to me. "Eat, Kurt." I shook my head, smiling faintly. "You keep it. I'm fine." The truth was, I no longer had the strength to swallow. Each breath felt like my chest was being squeezed. I thought of my father, the man who once said an officer must die on his feet. I gave a bitter laugh. I couldn't even stand anymore. I was just a defeated man, slumped in a corner, trying to hold on to the last scraps of pride like the torn fabric of my uniform. When the sun climbed higher, I tried to stand and go outside for air. But my legs buckled. Everything went black. I fell, my head striking the ground. I heard someone shout my name, then everything sank into silence, deep and heavy like the bottom of a well. When I opened my eyes, it was already night. A small oil lamp cast a dim glow. I was lying on a bed with a blanket over me. A man sat beside me, not Carl, but an American soldier. He looked to be in his early 20s, sun-browned face, gentle eyes. When he saw me awake, he smiled. "Good evening, Lieutenant. I'm James." I stayed silent. His voice was soft, carrying no threat. He placed a warm cup of water and a small piece of white bread on the table beside me. "Eat. Nobody here wants you to die." I looked at the cup, then at him. No one had ever said that to me before, that they didn't want me to die. On the battlefield, everyone wanted either to kill or to survive. There was no room for words as gentle as these. I frowned slightly, my voice dry. "Why?" "I'm your enemy." James smiled, shrugging lightly. "Not anymore. Right now, you're just a hungry man." I wanted to argue, but my throat burned. He patiently helped me sit up and handed me the cup. Warm water slid down my throat, spreading through my chest. My nose stung. When James left, I kept staring after him. I couldn't understand. Why was someone I'd hated treating me this way? Was it mockery or just the pity of a victor? But his voice hadn't sounded arrogant. It had sounded kind. That night, I drifted into feverish sleep. I dreamed of Hamburg. My mother stood by the window, the kitchen light turning her hair to silver threads. She was making soup. Steam rose, the sharp smell of pepper filling the room. I heard her voice. "Kurt, eat, my son. You need strength to live, not to fight." I wept in the dream. When I awoke, Carl was sitting there, smiling softly. "You're better now." I nodded, whispering, "I ate the American's bread." He looked surprised, then smiled kindly. "So what? It's just bread." I glanced out the window. Morning light glimmered on the barbed wire, shining like strands of silver. For the first time in weeks, the wire no longer seemed menacing. It was just a boundary, between pride and survival, between hatred and humanity. I touched the leftover piece of bread on the table. Cold, dry, yet to me the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. Silently, I told myself, I don't want to die anymore. I want to live. I have to live to go home. That thought felt like a confession from someone who had once believed himself unbreakable. I didn't know what I would live for, or for whom, but at that moment I knew one thing for sure. I wanted to see my mother again, and I wanted to taste soup with pepper so strong it burned my tongue. In the days after I woke up, James came to the camp every morning. He always brought something, a bucket of water, a few loaves of bread, or simply a smile. I never understood why he cared. I never tried to be friendly. Every time he asked, "How are you feeling today?" I gave the same curt answer, "Fine," then turned away. But he never seemed offended. He always spoke in that calm, even tone, as if there were no war, no line dividing us. One morning, James took me outside for some air. The early sun pierced through the mist, making the barbed wire glisten. As he poured water into a tin cup, he said, "You know, back home in Kansas, the sky's a lot clearer than this." I gave a faint, cold smile. "I don't care about Kansas." "Fair enough. I don't care about Berlin either," he replied lightly. "But I guess mothers everywhere are the same. They all worry about their sons going off to war." I froze. For weeks, I had forced myself not to think of my mother. Every time I did, my chest ached. She was probably somewhere among the ruins of Hamburg. I lowered my head and murmured, "My mother used to say salt makes food taste better." She always kept a jar by the stove. James smiled. So did mine. But she said pepper's what reminds you you're still alive. We both laughed then. A strange, quiet laugh without hatred or rank. Just two men far from home, talking about their mothers. After that, James told me about his family farm, fields of golden corn stretching to the horizon, and a dog named Max that chased everything that moved. He said when the war was over, he'd go back, marry the girl from the next town, and never pick up a gun again. I sat silently, my throat tightening. I didn't dare tell him my dream. It was too small, too fragile, just to live, just to eat a meal with the smell of pepper like when I was a boy. That afternoon, as he was leaving, I asked, "Why are you kind to us? Don't you hate us?" James squinted slightly and said, "Hate? I used to. When I saw German soldiers kill my friends in Normandy, I wanted to shoot anyone wearing that uniform. But then I saw a young German prisoner, maybe 19, crying because he missed home, and I realized, we're not that different. We're all afraid to die. We all miss our mothers." I didn't answer. His words blended into the wind echoing through the yard. That night I lay on my bunk, staring at the gray wooden ceiling, thinking about James, about his eyes when he spoke. They weren't the eyes of a victor. They were the eyes of someone who understood loss, and I knew then he was telling the truth. The Americans weren't demons. War was. The next day, when James handed me a piece of bread, I took it. No hesitation, no pride. I said quietly, "Thank you." He nodded, smiling. You're welcome, Lieutenant. For the first time since my capture, I ate in peace. The bread wasn't good, the soup was still watery, but I could taste salt on my tongue. I didn't know if it came from the bread or my tears. That night, I wrote in the corner of a small notebook I had found. Today, I said thank you to an American. I didn't feel shame. I felt human again. That day, the sun was gentle. After weeks of gray skies, the light spilling over the yard felt like a gift. We were called to line up. A group of American soldiers carried trays of food. The first time I had seen steam rising from a meal since my capture. I barely paid attention until James placed a tray in front of me. On it sat beef stew, mashed potatoes, bread, and 2 small, crisp, white packets. I picked one up, squinting at the faint print, salt and pepper. I froze. 2 things so ordinary, yet so distant from us for so long. I looked up and asked quietly, You're giving us salt and pepper? James smiled and nodded. Just a meal, Kurt. But I figured it should have flavor. He said it and moved on, leaving me staring at the steaming tray, my hands trembling. I tore open the salt. Tiny white crystals tumbled out like snow. I sprinkled them over the mashed potatoes, listening to the faint crackle as they fell, feeling my heart soften. Then I opened the pepper. Its sharp aroma spread at once, carrying me back to my mother's kitchen in Hamburg, her laughing as she stirred a pot of soup, humming under her breath. Eat, Kurt. A little pepper to warm you up. Her voice echoed in my head, so soft and far away that I bit my lip to keep from crying. I picked up the spoon and lifted the mashed potatoes to my mouth. Just ordinary potatoes, but to me it was the most delicious taste of my life. I ate slowly, feeling each grain of salt dissolve on my tongue, each hint of pepper warming my chest. I wasn't eating because I was hungry. I was eating because for the first time I wanted to live. Truly live. I looked around. The other prisoners were eating too, quietly. No arguments, no contemptuous looks, no despair. Only human beings, once on opposite sides, sitting under the same sky, eating a meal with flavor. Rolf, the man who once fought me, sat across the table. He watched me for a moment, then said softly, "Good, isn't it, Lieutenant?" I smiled. Yes, I don't think I've ever tasted anything better. Rolf bowed his head slightly. No one brought up the past. No apologies, no forgiveness. We understood each other through our eyes, the eyes of men who had once been proud, now grateful simply to breathe. That afternoon, James returned. He sat next to me, looking out at the yard where a few prisoners were hanging laundry. "You know," he said, "my mother used to tell me that war only makes people forget how alike they really are." I replied quietly, "My mother taught me that salt helps you treasure every meal." James laughed. "Then I guess our mothers would have been good friends." I nodded, smiling back. For a moment, I forgot I was a prisoner. I forgot I had once hated him. I remembered the day of my capture in Normandy, how I had sworn I would rather die than be taken alive. And now, sitting under the sun next to an American, I finally understood. Living wasn't shame. Living was a chance to realize how wrong I had been. That night, I wrote in my small notebook, "Today, I ate a meal with flavor." I once saw salt and pepper as symbols of humiliation. But now I know they're the taste of kindness. The Americans don't poison us with spices. They heal us by letting us feel human again. I closed the notebook and looked up at the sky. Through the iron frame of the fence, I saw the sun setting, staining the clouds a deep orange, strangely peaceful. And I whispered in my heart, "Mother, I'm still alive." And I've learned something this whole war never taught me, that kindness knows no victor. Since the day of that meal with flavor, Everything in the camp seemed different, or perhaps I was the one who had changed. I no longer looked at the Americans with hatred. They were still the guards, and I was still a prisoner, but between us, there was no longer a chasm, only people, each carrying their own kind of wound. I started helping them, something I never imagined I would do. James asked me to translate letters written by prisoners to their families. I agreed at first just to pass the time, but the more I translated, the more I understood. The men who had once been my subordinates also had families, fears, and hopes, just like me. One letter said, "I'm still alive. Tell our son his father isn't a hero, only a man lucky enough to keep breathing." I stopped writing and stared at that line for a long time. I too was lucky to keep breathing. The only difference was that I used to think it was something I deserved. Now, every breath felt like a debt I had to repay by living better. One day, Rolf collapsed while working in the yard. I ran to help him up. He looked at me, surprised. "You're helping me?" I thought the lieutenant didn't need men like me. I shook my head. "There are no lieutenants here anymore, Rolf. Only people." He stayed quiet for a moment, then let out a rough laugh. We walked back to the barrack together without another word. But in that silence, there was reconciliation. No apologies, no explanations, just understanding. In the following days, Carl and I started teaching a few prisoners English. Sometimes young American guards came by to learn German, joking, "Your language is tough, Lieutenant." I replied, "There are no enemies left, only people trying to talk to each other." They laughed, and James simply nodded at me. I didn't know if they truly understood what I meant. But to me, language was no longer a tool for command. It was a bridge between two worlds that had once bled. One afternoon, James brought me an envelope. "From Hamburg," he said. "They found it among a pile of lost mail." My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a letter from my father, written before he died. His handwriting was slanted but firm. "Kurt, if you are alive to read this, live in a way worthy of your father who fought. But remember, fighting isn't always done with guns. Sometimes the strongest man is the one who knows when to stop." I folded the letter, tears dripping onto the paper. I no longer felt ashamed to cry. Tears, I realized, weren't weakness. They were proof that I still had a heart. From that day on, I stopped calling James the American. I called him by his name, and he called me Kurt, not Lieutenant. We didn't need titles anymore. Each morning, when I stepped into the yard and looked at the fence, it no longer felt like a prison. It was simply a border, separating me from the man I used to be. On the other side, I had been someone who gave orders, who believed only in honor and hatred. On this side, I had learned to listen, to say thank you, and to share my bread. I realized that if war teaches anything at all, it's how to value peace. And I swore to myself, if I ever make it home, I will tell everyone that kindness can come from the place you hate most. The day we were told we would be released, no one believed it. Some cheered, some just sat in silence, and I simply stared out at the yard, where the barbed wire glimmered under the afternoon sun. I had once hated that wire, symbol of captivity. Now it was only a faded memory, a blurred line between past and present. James walked over, carrying a small cloth bag. He handed it to me with his familiar smile. "For you." I opened it. Inside were 2 small packets, one salt, one pepper. I looked at him, my throat tight. "You want me to carry the taste of this place?" He smiled. "I want you to remember that kindness has a taste too. Whether you're in a camp or out there, don't forget it." I couldn't speak, only nodded. I tucked the 2 little packets into my shirt, over my heart. They weighed almost nothing, but it felt as though I was carrying a piece of the new man inside me. We left the camp at dawn. The truck rolled past wide fields where wildflowers grew thick. I looked up at the blue sky and thought of Kansas, James's home, where the sky must be clearer, just as he'd said. I pictured him going back there, meeting his mother, marrying the girl he loved, never picking up a gun again. I smiled. I hoped he would. And me, I returned to Hamburg. The city was no longer the place I had left. Houses reduced to rubble, smoke still rising from old streets. I walked through piles of bricks, my heart tight, but my eyes dry. I had cried enough, cried for death, for honor, for the meaningless things I once believed in. I found the small house where my mother had lived. On the kitchen table lay only a cracked glass salt jar. I picked it up, dust thick on its surface. I smiled faintly, reached into my pocket, and took out the 2 packets James had given me. I set them beside the broken jar and whispered, "I brought them back, Mother." In the years that followed, I never wore a uniform again. I became a history teacher at a small school. When I spoke about war, I didn't talk about victories or defeats, weapons or battlefields. I spoke about people, about the ones I thought were my enemies, but who gave me salt and pepper when I was starving. My students would sit in silence, listening. One day a boy asked, "Sir, aren't you afraid of being captured again?" I smiled. No. A person is only imprisoned as long as hatred lives in his heart. And I don't have it anymore. In the afternoons, after the students left, I would sit in the empty classroom with sunlight slanting through the windows. I'd open my desk drawer and take out the 2 small packets, now faded but still intact. I'd lay them on the desk, looking at them for a long time. White salt, black pepper. So simple, yet they had changed my life. I'd sprinkle a little pepper over the hot soup the janitor had brought me. Its sharp scent rose up, warm and familiar. I'd smile and murmur to myself, "War took everything from me, except the taste of kindness."